Just getting started. My name is Shane Stillwell. You can find me on the interwebs by that handle on various places, GitHub and Twitter. And today we're going to talk about Browserify. We're going to just mostly do an introduction of where Browserify fits into the whole thing. We're going to talk about how we got to where we are in the current state of JavaScript. We're going to talk about some specific key concepts that you need to understand when you're employing Browserify in your workflow. And then we're going to roll loose and show kind of the code we'll need to kind of build an app with features and Angular for this presentation using Browserify. So without any further ado, let's get started. So I believe the current state of JavaScript downloading is a mess. So what do I mean by that? I mean that there are a million more different ways to get code from your editor loaded into the browser. You can use required US, you can concatenate them all, you can load them all with just various script tags, you can use CDNs. There are a million different ways that you can get your code loaded into the browser. And so I'm going to give you another one, really two way right here that we can load your code in the browser. But I believe this is a good way. This is a way that solves a lot of the problems that we've had with various issues that have cropped up as JavaScript just started as a toy way back in the day to now where it's powering most of the front end single page app. So let's do a little bit of history here. So way back in the Stone Age, I remember this, I'm a little bit older. So I remember that the Stone Age of JavaScript, it was just a toy. It was just something that you just used to maybe pop up an alert that said something, and you had to require click here text, because all the links back then had to have click here in them. That was just mandatory, otherwise people didn't know what to do with that new underlined word. So this was back when JavaScript was just a toy, just some little novelty. We could make things happen, and you can actually, do you guys know that you can actually invoke JavaScript like this using the href attribute on the A tag? Yeah, pretty cool. But luckily we learned that there's nothing there for us, and so we moved on into what we call the Bronze Age of loading JavaScript. So what we did is we took this script block and we put this in our header, maybe in our head of HTML. And if you were like me, you just kind of sprinkled them throughout all your HTML. Maybe if a table on a certain page needed some JavaScript, you load that into your template. Back in the day, I was using PHP to do this, but whatever you were using, maybe you're including a snippet of JavaScript code there. And of course, we're using functions that are global. So the add to cart function we have here and the change background function, those are all on the global space. Now this was a nightmare to debug. I don't know about you, if you've ever had to go through code that was written like this, where there was these snippets of script sprinkled all throughout. But it was horrible to try to figure out where that code got loaded in from and why it's executing. It's not working on this particular page. And it was very difficult. It's also, the code wasn't easy to maintain. We had snippets of code all over the place. And really code reuse was dubious or doubtful at best that you could actually reuse code like this throughout your website. It was a pretty dark time in JavaScript. Kind of a lot of held in the balance here when you're writing app or writing JavaScript like this. But we get to a new age where jQuery appears on the scene. I really believe that jQuery did a lot to help forward JavaScript from being just a laughable language that's somehow in the browser to actually be used to power much of the front end. And so jQuery kind of taught us that, these script and source tags can go in the head, but really, it's better practice to put them right before the closing body tag. And so you would include your modernizer and your jQuery. And you wanted to have the jQuery date picker, so you would include jQuery UI as well. And you have a bunch of photos on your page, and so you include the jQuery carousel plugin, and then maybe if you wanted to have a pop-up box for one of your images in the middle, you would include your jQuery fancy box and tooltips, using jQuery tooltips, and on and on and on and on until you got to your actual app code, where you kind of bootstrap this whole thing and bind it all together. Now this is great because now you don't have code sprinkled all over the place. It's a lot easier to maintain. You can reuse the code, of course, but it also introduced a few problems. One of them being the order of including this is very important. If I were accidentally somehow put jQuery out at the top, it would complain and blow up because jQuery is not loaded yet. So the order of loading this is very important. And if you don't have it correctly, it will blow up on your face. Also, we noticed another problem with doing it this way is now the browser is having to make multiple HTTP requests, either to a CDN or to your file server or to your web server. So load all these up. I've seen apps that have well over 24 of these in the HTML that's being loaded. That's a huge performance hit. So, on the one hand, this way helped us out a lot to get more organized, but on the other hand, it introduced some more problems. So several years ago, a new thing came out called Node.js, and it became popular. In fact, it became wildly popular, and people were really liking what they were doing on Node.js. And there were modules being written all the time. In fact, right now there are over 83,000 different modules for Node.js that you can use. And some guy, James Holiday, goes by the handle of Substack, decided, I'd really like to use some of those great modules in the browser. I'd really like to use this awesome code we're generating in Node in the browser. And so he came out with a command line, basically run on Node, that's called Browserify. Now, what does Browserify solve for us? Number one, it solves the code reuse, because now you have that holy grail of you can start using some code. If you're using Node on the server, you can use some code on the browser as well. Lodash is a perfect example. I use it all the time, both on the server and in the browser. Also solves the problem of performance. Now we have, so to actually use Browserify, comes with this command line. You say Browserify, and you start at the app.js file. And from there, we'll go through and actually build all your JavaScript and you output it into our dist or distribution file, dist.js. And that's it. You then include your script tag, which references the dist.js in your browser, and that's it. That's all your JavaScript is bundled up into that one file. So it also means you can organize the code how you want to. So before you can have all your files broken out in folders and what have you, and Browserify will automatically pull those all into one bundle. So you don't have to reference them on the browser side. And it uses this by using some common methodologies that are brought forth by CommonJS. Alright, so CommonJS. How many of you heard me use Node before? Okay, so you're familiar with how CommonJS works. So then we're going to give Browserify, or even Node in this case, a starting point, which is our app.js file, right? And it's going to look in that file and it's going to say, I'm going to look for all the required statements that I see. And it's going to, for example, in this app.js, it finds a required /utils. What's it going to do? It's going to look for a local file called utils.js. If it doesn't find a local file called utils.js, it's going to look for a folder called utils, and inside that it's going to expect index.js. So it's really flexible in how you can load different files into you. So but it's going to put together this whole tree. As you can see, we're going to start at app.js, and from there we're going to follow this tree all the way on each branch. So we're going to load in utils.js. So now it's going to open up the utils.js file, and it's also going to start looking for more required statements. And it finds one for /config. So it's going to open up the config.js file in the same directory. Make sense? It also finds one for Lodash. But there's no /, there's no /. And so it knows that Lodash is a module that it's going to have to look somewhere else for, not the local directory. So it's got two places it's going to look for. It's either going to look for the core modules that are shipped with Node, or We're going to look in the node_modules folder, which that's the default place for node npm to store all of the modules that you've loaded locally. So let's say I've installed Nodash locally with npm install Nodash. It put that module in the node modules folder, and I can easily load it just by saying require Nodash. Okay, so that whole top branch has now been loaded in, and so it goes back to the app.js file, and it looks for the next required, which is models, and it finds the models.js file. And it loads that up, and you can see that it also has a require Nodash, but it's already got Nodash, so it's not going to load it a second time. This is kind of important too, like in Browserify, if it's already seen that file, it's not going to load a second time. You know, it already knows I've got this file, good to go, and I'm going to the next one. And so as it's looking in the models.js file, it finds the required person, so it loads in person.js. Okay? So as I've mentioned, this required is going to look in both the node pro modules, which is for example, the URL or the file system or the HTTP module, or it's going to look in the local directory for loading up modules, either a local file or a local folder, or it'll also look in the modules that you installed locally in the node modules folder. So let's kind of zoom in on the app.js and the utils.js files. Of course, this is a validated program I did for your entertainment only. So we have the app.js file, right? And in there, that's how we use the require function. Now you know that require is not, the browser doesn't know what require is. It doesn't have a function called require. The browser doesn't know a few things that are common in Node.js. So in Node.js, you have this require function, which allows you to then load in other modules or files. If you look at the utils.js file, you'll see we're also loading in some other files or modules. But then there's this quirky exports. That's the only thing that's not in the browser. Okay, where does exports come from? That's not declared anywhere. It's actually an object that's available in every file in Node, and it's just an object that you would attach any property you'd like to be exported, to be available outside when the require returns. It'll return the exports object. So that's something that we can then, so as you can see, we have exports.add, that copy that we made that a function, and then we have exports.sub, which is also a function. Now if you look back at our app.js file, you'll notice that we recorded the utils file and assigned that to the utils variable. Later on we're just using the utils.add function, and we're invoking it that way, and we get back a result. Now this is what I love so much about Node, is that the app.js file does not care about what files that utils needs to get that done. It just knows that those are exported, and I can call that and get a result. So as we see over in our utils file, we're calling the add function, which is in return calling a log function that's on the config variable, and then we're returning x plus y. Pretty simple, but it kind of illustrates how utils is abstracted from app.js. And so for every file that we have, we're requiring what we need to get our job done, and then we're exporting what we think somebody else needs. So we have our required function, we have our exports function, but then there's also this quirky module object as well, which module.exports is actually equal to exports. I won't get into all that, because if you're not familiar with that, it gets a little confusing. But just for now, understand that we are exporting these two functions from this file. Also, there's this private variable that I just thrown in there, name equals Shane. It's not available outside of this file. App.js has no idea that there's this variable called name. It's only what I specifically export. All right, so enough talking. Regular programmers, developers, software engineers, yes. Yeah, we like to see code, don't we? I do. Not other people's code. I like looking at my code. All right, so we have this app. So what we're going to do is we are going to kind of show the steps of adding Browserify into and create an AngularJS fabricated web app here that we have. So right now, look at the source here. This is a generic HTML page using Bootstrap for the CSS, and that's it. There's no JavaScript enabled. There's no JavaScript here. There's no Browserify in action at this point. It's just simply a vanilla HTML site, and we're gonna start putting Browserify in that. Okay, so let me go to. You guys see that all right? You guys see that all right? We're gonna. Okay. Well, there you go here. Here. Let's check out step 2. Alright, so step 2. Well, actually, let's look at the. Okay, so we loaded our. You see there, we're going to start referencing this this.js file. But before we look at that file, let's go back and actually look at what we need that. So we have. It's telling me I got to reload this up, which is fine. Okay, so in my JavaScript folder, I have an app.js file. And it's really sophisticated JavaScript here. Console.log load. So what's going to happen is when this starts up, yes, it's going to just run like the console. But what I wanted to show you is what Browserify will do with this here particular piece of code. So now you understand that we are, go back here. We're running, every time we're doing this, we're running this Browserify app.js output to this.js. So anytime I change any of my source JavaScript, I'm running that command to regenerate that distribution file for the JavaScript. So let's take a look at what it actually does, what it looks like. Now, you can see right here, there's my console.log, right? And if you'll notice, there is this kind of this object right here. So it's a running column, and then in there there's this array, which its first argument is an object, which passes in the require, the module, and the exports. Remember I told you that the browser has no idea, it doesn't understand. In Node, it offers the require, the module, and the exports for every file. The browser has no clue what those are. And so Browserify actually creates those for you. So that's what all this code up top here is all about. Is it creates the require function, and it creates the exports object, and all of that. And I want you to look very carefully too. We are not just concatenating files. Okay? That might be a misconception that Browserify just goes and finds all your files, concatenates them together, and bam, there is your JavaScript in one big blob. It's not what it's doing. If you'll notice, every file, so this is my file here, that's kind of like in its own little space there. Scoped out to its own little spot. And as you see we're adding more files, you'll see that each one of them will have its own sophisticated map that Browserify has put together in this code. So the top part really is just Browserify giving the browser the required, no pun intended, I guess, the required code that it needs to actually execute what you have in your code. So it kind of notifies the browser. Alright, let's move on to the second step, because our app actually doesn't do anything yet, right? Still doesn't get this out of this mode here. Alright, so like these links don't work yet, and it's not doing anything, and all we have is this console.log. So let's go to step 3. Alright. Now we've actually got some code. And if you're familiar with Angular, this is basically just a great Angular module called MWJS. We're seeing that this module has a dependency of ng-route, and then under the config there, we're declaring that we're going to declare just the root route. But you notice at the top, I actually have 2 require statements. And I use Bower to install Angular and Angular route. So on the command line, I did a Bower install Angular and then a Bower install Angular route. And so as you can see on the left-hand side, there's a Bower components. Those are installed in Bower components, and I'm referencing them here by just going up one directory and going to Bower components and writing the Angular.js file and the Angular route file. Okay, so now Browserify knows that not only do I have this original app.js file, I've got two other JavaScript files I've got to include in my bundle. So let's walk over there and see what that looks like now. Our HTML is not really going to change, so we're still just referencing our dis.js file. But now watch what happens when I refresh here. Bam! That's a lot. A whole bunch of JavaScript, because you know what this is, of course. This is just Angular route, and then way down at the bottom is my code, right there. You'll notice now this has a reference of 3. So there are 3 different mappings for code here. If I were to search for that's actually the Angular code. And the one on the first is the ng route or Angular route code. So 3 different sections of code it has. And still our app really doesn't do anything, but now it's kind of like a simply bootstrapped Angular app. About how it's not doing anything just yet. Okay. Let's move on to step 4. So step 4, we've changed things up a little bit. We added some functionality to our app. So let's go over a little bit of functionality here. Now we actually have routes. So clicking on the home page, I can see hi on the home page, nice to meet you. Click on the about page, we get an about page. And on the help page, we get a help page, of course. So let's kind of look at how I'm doing this as well. Now, you'll notice there are 2 additional require statements. So if you're not familiar with Angular or the like, it's not really a big deal because you can use Browserify with Ember, Backbone, whatever. What I'm doing is I'm saying, okay, I need 2 more pieces of code. I'm referencing 2 other files. So right here I have a reference to the help index. I'm just leaving off the .js because it automatically knows to look for that file first. And that's this one right here. That's this index file. Okay? So now we're looking at the help index file, which our app.js has said I require this code. And here again, I'm saying I need this this Angular route because this, of course, is another whole different module in Angular. This is the mwjs.help module, and it declares that it's dependent upon ng route. As I mentioned before, it's now doing this again. Even though Browserify is seeing this again, it already knows that I've got the Angular.js file already got that loaded in my bundle. I've got the Angular route file, I've got the load in my bundle, so it's not going to do it again. You're not going to have duplication of code like that. It knows, even though 2 are also like another step down. So we actually have to go 2 steps up for this one rather than the app.js, we just have to go 1 step up. So it's really good in the sense that it keeps track of files and or modules it's already seen. So that's our help.index, and the above.index will be almost exactly the same. We're basically also over here, if you're familiar with Angular, we're declaring a route for when it's /about, we're going to load this template. That's not Browserify, that's Angular, of course. Alright, so our app is still kind of simple, it's just has some routes now. So let's actually do something a little more with our app. Alright, so what do we have to do now? So our page isn't anymore, but now on the About page, we've added some more functionality. You can click this to toggle the Basically, we're just talking in class, on and off. And then on the help page, we actually have this really interesting contact thing, so we can put my email in there. And I can click send, and then all it does is use that wonderful little alert, and just tells me my email address. So, what does this code actually look like? Alright. So now we're in the about index file, and then refresh this. We're in the about index.js file. And down here, I'm declaring a directive in Angular. So in Angular, basically I'm declaring a directive called blue background directive. That's the name of it. But I'm requiring another file. So I'm going another step deeper to run out this file, this about.js or about index.js file is now requiring its dependency on another file. So this blue background, which is right here. Now, that's the directive code. That's the code for making an Angular directive. They'll have in its own little file. This is where I told you that this module.exports is exports, and then there's also module.exports. And without getting too confusing on the whole subject, is you can basically, most of the time you would use exports, and then the return value from anything you require is an object that has those properties that you exported. But let's say you want to override that. You want to say, forget you, I don't want to return an object, I want to return an array. And that's where I would use module.exports instead of exports. So now I'm returning an array instead of an object. And this array has one element, and that is just a function, which is our directive code. So now that becomes, that's where the require comes from, right there. Let's jump over to the help index because we actually load up a controller here. So at the about index, I load up a directive. At the help index, I load up a controller. We're doing the same exact thing here. I'm basically requiring this code to come from somewhere else. So this code is the same exact thing. I'm using module.exports to force it to whatever type I want, which is another array in this case. Now, notice what I'm not doing. I am not creating a list of JavaScript files I need to load up. I'm not creating a list of files manually somewhere. I am not having to keep track of which JavaScript files should be included with this bundle. It's automatically finding them for me by following all these required statements and resolving them automatically. So if you've ever had like errant JavaScript because you've been loading them like we had talked about with a bunch of script statements, this solves that because you're not having to manually keep track of that anymore, or remove them, or adjust them, or have that issue. And also, I can organize my code how I want to. I can take my code, and as you've seen here, I have it split up into different directories. In those directories, I've included my index.js file, which is kind of the main part of that module. I also have my template file in there. So I can organize the code how I see fit in Browserify via Node. It automatically just find all the files that I need, and I can store them wherever we want. If I wanted to, I can store them as actual modules in the Node modules folder. So it's really flexible how you organize your code, how you see fit. What I also do is I put all my tests in the same folder as well. And if I'm using SAS or less, I'll include the SAS or less specific files in that one folder. So all of my code, all of my CSS, all of my tests, my templates are one file that's easy to transfer around. So Browserify solves that whole organization code issue, so I can organize it how I see fit, how I see best. Okay, one last step. All right. So we're going to refresh our help page here. Notice we have some names up there. Barney and Fred and Wilma and Betty. Just random names picked out of the phone book. And the ages, of course, are 36, 40, 36, and 37. I have no idea what block means. But there are two characters that are 36. Okay. Very exciting, of course. Let's figure out what's going on here. Alright, now this is on our help page. So we're going to go to our help index page. Let's see. The controller. Don't use them. Alright. So now this is the controller that I originally showed you that just had the module exports. And I think before we just had the email function on there. But now I'm requiring at the top there Lodash, and I'm storing that in the variable of underscore. And then I'm also creating an array of objects called characters. And then I have this function called find them all. And in that function I am using Lodash to actually find all the characters that are 36 years old. I store the output of that into the R36 variable, and I'm going to just return that R36 length whenever that find them all function gets run. And if you understand, if you're familiar with A here, this is on the template. I basically am calling this function on the template to get that number 2. So in my template, I can show you really quick so you follow along. I have this find them all right there, and that just references the function in Angular, and that function in return is using Lodash, which was brought in from using require. So now I'm loading local JavaScript files of my own app, but now I'm loading in stuff from Bower. I'm loading in stuff from NPM, because I installed Lodash using NPM installed Lodash. All these different sources I can use if I want to load in my JavaScript files. So I can be pick and choose where all my code come from, and I can use multiple different sources. So that's one way that you can build a quick app using Browserify. You can organize the code how you want. You can use multiple different sources. And it kind of keeps track of all the JavaScript files that you're using. So let's go back here. All right. So it's really easy to start putting together a code like that, and you get that in your workflow. Now I'm going to be totally honest with you. Before I started organizing for this talk, I never actually used the Browserify command line option. No, I don't use it a lot. I use Grunt to actually, my workflow includes Grunt. And I have a Grunt task that Grunt Browserify is a module that you can use with Grunt. And you can tell it, hey, look for all of my, there's a bunch of different options that will basically spit out a command line. You can use a particular command line arguments that Grunt will run. Grunt will run for you. You can use Grunt as well. But I watch my JavaScript files. So when I'm developing, what's actually happening is I'm running. I'm opening up a JavaScript file and I'm making some changes. I hit save. Grunt automatically figures out that file has changed, so it reprocesses that all my JavaScript code and creates a new bundle. And even in Grunt, I have a little Grunt notify that I use. Right in the top right of my screen for OS 10, it tells me, hey, after like 2 seconds, it says it's done processing, and I go back to the browser and refresh, and life is sweet. I can change it there. So yes, I automate a lot of this. I don't run Browserify by hand. You can if you want, but if you're actually in the process of including Browserify in your workflow, I would suggest using Grunt or Go to do that for you, to automatically watch those, to put the files where you want. That, of course, you can use to minify your code. Do anything else you want with your disk.js file. Now externals, that's a really cool thing. So as I'm developing, I'm including Angular and jQuery and maybe UI Route and Lodash and all these other third-party tools that I use in my JavaScript code. And after a while, by building that whole bundle starts to take maybe 3, 4, 5 seconds long. I'm really impatient, so that's way too long for me to wait. So what I do is you can actually split up your bundle into 2 different bundles. So I'm going to take all of my vendor code, like jQuery and Angular and the like, and I want to put them into one bundle. And I will usually when I start up all my grunt tasks, then I'll automatically process and create that, maybe a libs.js I'll call that, create that bundle. But I want all my app code will be in the disk.js bundle. But the problem you'll run into is that if you create 2 different bundles and you're executing 2 different codes, then you have to let Browserify know that you run across this thing called Lodash. Don't load it into your bundle, but know that it is external. It's already kind of just assume that it's already there for you. So it's kind of a way to break up your bundles into your lib-specific or vendor-specific code and just your code. And bam, once again, you're flying along really fast and the bundles are being compiled in half a second and you're happy again. So externals are a good way to be able to split apart the code that you're using. And I would argue also adds a little bit of performance increase on the front end as well. Transforms. Transforms are the real power of Browserify because you can transform your code as you're flying along. So, for example, let's say use CoffeeScript levers in here. Anybody? Right there in the back. Yep. CoffeeScript. Some so, some not so. Never actually used CoffeeScript, so I don't have any direct experience. But I hear that you can actually use, I think it's Coffeeify or whatever, but it's a transform that will transform your CoffeeScript into JavaScript while it's processing that bundle. So it's really convenient. You're working along, you're happy in your CoffeeScript, and you're with save, and that bundle gets processed, and next thing you know, it produces JavaScript on the back end there. I use one called Browserify. So as you'll notice, I installed some stuff from Bower. I'd be a happy camper if everybody just used NPM for everything, but there's some stuff that's on Bower that I can't get on NPM. So there's a Browserify transform that if it can't find it in Node in the Node modules, it'll look in the Bower components folder for that particular piece of code, and it will load it from there. So it's a way that you can use not only in Node NPM, but also Bower as well by having a transform that automatically kind of helps Browserify figure out where to find this module at. There are a few other transforms, but really they make it nice to where you can do things to your code on the fly. One of them I haven't used yet, which I'm excited to try out, is one for ng annotate. There's for Angular, you kind of have to tell it these are the variables I'm injecting into this function. It's kind of a pain in the butt. But ng annotate is a way that you can just put those in comments, and Browserify will then automatically write that special piece of code for you to inject in the code.
So with the Browserify, does that just let you do require the component name rather than adding up to it?
Right. So you saw me actually requiring the file directly, whereas if I was using the transform of, so his question is, if I go back to, so I'm directly including the file here at the top using Bower in Angular.js. So if I was using Browserify, I could just do something like that. And it would know, hey, I'm finding this in Node modules and in Bower components.
Is there what browser properties that Active does?
The browser, yeah, if you can use that way as well. You haven't used that though?
It's the paths require either.
But if it's only in Bower, because I'm not sure how that would work to use that for, because there's no package.json, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, those transforms are a great way to basically work with the code on the fly. And so what did we look at? We've done a really cursory look at Browserify. We just kind of talked about what it is, went through kind of how it depends upon the methodologies and nomenclatures of Node, and some ways that you can include it in your app. I use Angular because I'm very familiar with Angular, but I'm sure you can use it with Ember or Backbone or whatever front-end JavaScript you're using. And of course, there are ways that you can use Browserify and take it far beyond, just the normal building a basic JavaScript bundle. So with that, I want to open up for questions or any additional comments, or yes, sir, I'll tell you name up there.
Whenever I get the option of using either all of my modules that get loaded in a browser or one file jobs, there are similar functions in the browser.
Did you talk about the asynchronous thing that require us?
Yeah, require means if I use app.js, I declare that the data main, and I don't compile that, it will actually load all the small pieces of the browser and get debug that way. Is there a similar function in Browserify, or are you just always working on that distribution package?
We always work on the distribution package, but you can tell it to create a map that will then also allow you to kind of map back your code to where, to source code. So, yeah, I don't really know a lot about Require. Honestly, I've gone to the Require website about a dozen times, and I've looked and I've started trying it, and I just couldn't get my mind around it. So, I can understand a little bit about it, but to me, the Browserify just clicked. I was already using Node, Browserify really clicked for me. So I can't really speak on all the direct relationships of how to do something in Browserify as you can do in Require.js. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I noticed when you were wiring up your main module for the Angular app, you specified 2 dependent modules in there.
Oh.
It's not main.
Totally skipped over that. Thank you for bringing it back to what I should have covered. Yes, .main, that is an Angular, that's an Angular property. So let me show you what's happening. So when I load up here, so you'll notice the modules export, I'm declaring an Angular.module. The way Angular works is that Angular will return an object, and one property on that object is the name, which is this right here, about mwjs.help, okay? So that's the name. So when I create a module in Angular, that's what gets assigned to the name, and so I'm using that up here. If I can get up there, I'm using that just to dynamically print that out. Now you'll notice right above it, I'm actually doing ng-route. Let me explain that too really quick. I didn't touch on that. Here, I'm not actually assigning required anything. I'm just, required, and that's because this is one of the issues too. Is like using Bower for Angular or Angular route, they just get attached to the window object automatically. They don't return anything. If I assign the value that returns from this require statement, it would be undefined, because those particular pieces of code, as they sit in Bower, don't actually return anything. Now you'll notice here I'm returning this module exports. That's returning whatever Angular.module creates, it creates an object, and that's returning that so I can then reference that. So excellent question. Yes, thank you for bringing that up.
Do you know how it deals with version conflicts? One of the big things with Node is if you depend on anything, it installs that for you, and if there's version conflicts, it all works because it's separate. But in the browser, obviously, you can only have one instance of a given API. So do you know if there's anything in place for that in core Browserify, or if that's something you kind of have to warm you and say figure it out?
Yeah, so like for versions, like within PM, you can install a specific version of that, locally in your npm modules folder, or your node modules folder. So that's how you would, because that's all Node or Browserify is doing, is loading whatever version you have installed there.
Right, I've seen like, let's say you depend directly on Lodash. You also depend on Angular, which has a dependency on.
So maybe they're dependent upon two different versions
of the same library.
Then you get them both. If it'll try to resolve them. Basically how Node resolves stuff and creates it so that
Relative to your current directory.
exactly, but it tries to match up the dependencies. Running Dial does this as well, to where like, okay, I need this specific version, so it's going to load. It's going to load a similar version. If it can't load a similar version, it's going to load two of them. So that's one thing about knowing your code and what it requires to.
Yeah, so that's a tough question.
No, I'm a joke.
Yeah, so when the process shows like you have JavaScript error, does this Browserify that it just like a simplify all JavaScript code into one line, so it will be very.
No, actually, as you can see here, it's not modified. Okay. And this is like, because I'm not using the modified version. So this is totally out in the blue, as big as we can get JavaScript. So, production, of course, I would use minified, but that's outside of Browserify. That's outside of my Browserify workflow. Like I would just use Ugrify and Grunt to actually then, compact this Browserify code. But normally when I'm doing development, I don't like to have the minified version. So yes, it'll show you the exact code location.
It seems like there is some overlap between Browserify Transform and some of the other tools you can use in project development.
Yeah. I mean, you could probably do a lot of the stuff you're doing in Browserify Transforms with just another task in Developer Grunt. Any questions? Well, thank you for being a great audience. Appreciate it.